Hi there. I'm Marlene. After 15 years of sacrificing my dreams, my savings, and my peace, I found out my mother had left everything, every last piece, to my brother. I stood there, erased from the life I fought to belong to. How do you forgive a family that never chose you in the first place? Have you ever been made to feel invisible by the ones who were supposed to love you most? Tell me, what time are you listening to this? And where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. I would love to hear your story. The air smelled of frosting and balloons, thick and sweet, but not meant for me. I stood by the edge of the living room, arms folded tight across my chest, my party dress too stiff, too bright for a day that wasn't mine. Kenny's name sprawled in bright blue letters across the cake that sat proudly in the center of the table. Kenny's smile lit up the room. Kenny's laughter filled the spaces where mine used to fit. No one looked at me. No one noticed. The decorations draped along the walls were all cars and dinosaurs, things Kenny loved, things that had nothing to do with me. I searched quietly, almost pleadingly for a sign, a second candle, an extra balloon, anything that whispered, "We didn't forget you." But the room answered with silence. Mom's voice cut through the chatter, too loud, too bright. "Marlene, sweetheart, come help cut the cake," she called from the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a towel like she was doing me a favor. Heads turned briefly toward me, not with joy, not even with acknowledgement, but with expectation. I moved slowly, each step heavier than the last, until I stood in front of the cake that bore no sign of me. The knife felt strange in my hand, too big, too cold. I made the first slice while they clapped for Kenny, cheering his name. As I passed out pieces of the cake, no one met my eyes. I wasn't the reason they smiled today. One small candle stood awkwardly on the far side of the table, its flame flickering uncertainly. No one noticed when it burned down to nothing. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip behind the rooftops, bleeding orange into the sky. I slipped out through the back door, the screen creaking behind me. The cool air kissed my flushed cheeks as I sat on the concrete steps, knees drawn to my chest. Dennis, my stepdad, was manning the grill, humming an old tune I half recognized. He offered me a smile once, soft and understanding, but I didn't move. I didn't trust my voice not to crack under the weight of everything I wasn't allowed to feel inside. Through the window, I watched Kenny tear open brightly wrapped gifts. I watched Mom laugh and clap and kiss his forehead. I watched the distance between us grow wider, a canyon carved by forgetfulness and choice. I pressed my forehead to my knees and closed my eyes. Maybe next year, I thought. Maybe next year they'll remember. In the fading light, my reflection in the window blurred into the night, just another shadow outside looking in. The rain made soft patterns against the cracked window pane, little taps like forgotten promises. I sat cross-legged on the mattress that doubled as my bed and couch, my fingers hesitating over the keypad. The apartment smelled like wet concrete and cheap laundry detergent, a smell that clung to the walls and to me. I took a deep breath and dialed. The phone rang twice before Mom answered, her voice hurried, distracted. I imagined her standing in the kitchen, one hand wiping a counter that didn't need cleaning, the other half listening. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, too bright, too distant. I swallowed. "Hi, Mom, My voice cracked, and I hated how small it sounded. "I was wondering if you could maybe help me out. Just a little. It's just the first month's rent. I can pay you back when I start work." There was a pause long enough for the rain to fill it. Then, with a sigh so faint I almost missed it, she said, "Oh, honey, I wish I could, but we're saving for Kenny's future. College isn't cheap." A hollow thud landed in my chest, cold and familiar. I nodded even though she couldn't see me, even though she wasn't really looking anyway. "Right," I whispered. "Of course, Kenny's future." She barely mumbled a goodbye before hanging up. I stared at the screen until it dimmed and the room felt a shade darker. A few days later, I went to a family barbecue, against my better judgment. I clutched a paper plate of greasy ribs and wilted potato salad, standing off to the side like a guest at someone else's life. From across the yard, I heard her laughing. Mom, in her best social voice, telling anyone who would listen about the generous college fund she was building for Kenny. She said it like a badge of honor, like a trophy gleaming in the sunlight. I looked down at my plate, appetite gone. The food felt heavy in my hands, the same way my heart did. They hadn't seen me. They didn't need to. Back at my apartment, the walls closed in. The overhead bulb flickered once, like it might burn out and leave me sitting there in the dark. I dropped my keys on the counter, pulled the crumpled rent notice from my bag. It was stained from the rain, the ink bleeding at the edges like something alive. I balled it up and hurled it across the room, watching it hit the wall with a soft, pathetic thud, before rolling under the table, forgotten. Maybe it wasn't about being enough. Maybe it was about being convenient. And maybe I was finally starting to understand the difference. The chill of late November crept through the thin windows of my apartment, weaving through the cracked floorboards and nestling deep into my bones. I stood by the kitchen counter, phone pressed tightly to my ear, my other hand nervously twisting the hem of my sweater. "Hi, Mom," I said, forcing a smile she couldn't see. "I was thinking, maybe you and Kenny could come over for Thanksgiving. I'm making a real dinner this year. Turkey, stuffing, the works." There was a pause, just long enough to let the hope rise before she deflated it with a single breath. "Oh, honey, that's sweet. But Kenny's not really up for gatherings right now. You know how sensitive he is." I nodded into the silence, murmuring something about understanding, even as the words bruised the roof of my mouth on their way out. We said goodbye quickly, politely, like strangers ending a customer service call. On Thanksgiving morning, I set the table with the best I had: mismatched plates, a few candles from the discount store, a hand-me-down tablecloth stitched with fading sunflowers. The smell of roasted turkey filled the apartment, rich and warm, almost enough to make the walls feel less empty. Almost. I set 2 extra chairs just in case hope was enough to make them appear. They didn't. I sat down, knife and fork neatly aligned, napkin folded across my lap, facing the empty chairs that stared back at me with silent accusations. One candle burned low between the untouched plates, its flame bobbing in the slight draft from the window. I ate alone. I pretended the phone would buzz any minute. I laughed too loudly at the sitcom reruns playing in the background. When night fell, and the leftovers were packed away with more care than they deserved, I curled up on the couch, scrolling mindlessly through Facebook. The first photo hit like a punch I should have seen coming. Mom and Kenny, beaming, surrounded by cousins and neighbors, plates piled high with food. The caption, "So thankful for the ones who matter most." I stared at the screen until the letters blurred together, the meaning soaking slowly into the hollow spaces behind my ribs. It wasn't just that they hadn't come. It was that they never planned to. Outside, the sounds of distant laughter and clinking glasses floated through the night air. I wrapped myself tighter in the old quilt Dennis had given me years ago, tucking the edges around my toes like armor. Maybe family isn't who you're born to. Maybe it's who shows up. My thumb hovered over the family group chat, the one that buzzed only when Kenny had a new accomplishment to boast, or Mom needed a favor. With one swipe, I deleted it. The apartment seemed quieter after that. Or maybe I just stopped listening. Maybe I was only invited to leave. The mornings always felt heavier after the holidays, like the apartment absorbed disappointment and refused to let it go. I shuffled into the kitchen, the familiar squeak of the floor under my bare feet greeting me as I pulled a battered planner from the counter. Bills, invoices, grocery lists. The routine that tied me to survival. My phone buzzed with an alert. $1,500 transferred to Darlene Williams. I stared at the notification a moment too long, my thumb hesitating before dismissing it. Month after month, the payment went out, like clockwork. Part obligation, part guilt. It's just family. It's what we do. I repeated it like a prayer every time I questioned the hollow pit growing in my stomach. The day dragged, gray and slow. Between editing jobs and coffee breaks, I found myself scrolling through social media, a habit I usually avoided when loneliness sat too close. That's when I saw it. Kenny, holding a brand new gaming console, grinning ear to ear. His caption exploded with emojis, party hats, champagne bottles, hearts, and the words that clenched my throat tight. Thanks to the best mom ever. I froze, blinking at the screen like it had betrayed me too. Best mom ever, paid for by the daughter she forgot existed. The tightness in my chest didn't ease when I clicked away. It followed me through the rest of the day, whispering that maybe I wasn't supporting a family struggling to survive. I was funding a fantasy. Later that week, during an accidental run-in at the grocery store, a distant acquaintance mentioned it casually over frozen peas. Did you hear? Kenny got a cash bonus from your mom for his birthday. Said it came out of the family fund. Nice, huh? I smiled because it was easier than crying in the freezer aisle. The dots connected themselves. I didn't need to do the math. I had been doing it for years, sending, sacrificing, shrinking, while they built a new life on top of the pieces I left behind. Back at my apartment, I opened my laptop and pulled up a blank email. My fingers hovered over the keys. Why am I only enough when I'm useful? The words sat there, raw and shaking, staring back at me. I didn't hit send. Instead, I closed the laptop gently, like handling something too broken to fix. Hours later, in the quiet hum of my kitchen, I opened my banking app. The numbers blurred together, the monthly payments stretching back like a trail of breadcrumbs leading nowhere. My thumb hovered over the Cancel Recurring Transfer button. Not yet, but soon. The Louisiana sun felt crueler than usual, pressing against my skin like a warning I didn't know how to heed. The backyard was crowded, the laughter a little too loud, the smiles a little too sharp. I gripped a sweating glass of lemonade and reminded myself to breathe, to endure, to blend. Family, I thought, adjusting the plastic fork on my paper plate. This was family. I floated between conversations, nodding when spoken to, laughing at jokes I didn't really hear. My mother's voice carried easily over the buzz of the gathering, bright and cutting like a whip hidden in lace. Not everyone can be as responsible as Kenny, she said, the words laced with sugary venom. Heads turned, polite laughter rippled, and then eyes darted away. No one met my gaze. No one wanted to hold the shame pooling in my chest. I felt myself shrinking, folding into the fabric of my dress, the uneven grass beneath my sandals swallowing me whole. Later that night, after the food was cleared and the paper lanterns dimmed, I sat curled in my bed, the shadows of the ceiling fan slicing the darkness into uneven pieces. My phone buzzed. It was Jake. I hesitated before opening the message, a part of me already bracing for whatever fresh sting it carried. There it was. A video. My mother's voice, unfiltered, casual, cruel, talking about me like I was some faded photograph, a disappointment she'd learned to hide behind Kenny's bright future. Laughing at my bad decisions, shrugging off the sacrifices I'd made like they were embarrassing hobbies. The words slipped into the cracks of my bones, filling the hollow places I'd spent years pretending weren't empty. Maybe it was never about effort. Maybe it was never about love. I let the phone slip from my hand onto the mattress, where it buzzed again, ignored. I stared at the ceiling, the spinning shadows slowing, thickening, like molasses dragged across glass. If loyalty means erasing myself, I whispered into the heavy dark, maybe it's time to be disloyal. The smell of lemon-scented cleaner hit me the second I stepped through the door. It was too sharp, too deliberate, like a stage hastily scrubbed for an unwanted audience. Kenny lounged on the living room couch, a smug grin pulling at the corner of his mouth as he half-watched some reality show. Rhonda was perched on the armrest, scrolling her phone with the kind of satisfaction that came from knowing secrets you weren't supposed to know. I barely nodded a greeting. Mom called out from the kitchen, her voice high and breezy, the way you sound when you're trying to cover something up. I followed the smell of fresh polish into the dining room and stopped short. There, spread out carelessly across the table, was a neat stack of papers. Legal stationery, familiar names typed across the top. I didn't mean to look. I swear I didn't. But my eyes caught the bolded line before I could pull them away. Last will and testament, everything. The house, the savings, the life insurance, all neatly assigned to Kenny, every last scrap of it. My name didn't appear once, not even a cursory mention, not even a keepsake. The floor beneath me tilted slightly, and for a moment I thought I might lose my footing. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "You weren't supposed to see that yet," Mom said from the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her tone more annoyed than apologetic. I turned to her, the words sticking somewhere between my lungs and throat. "Why?" I managed, barely louder than a whisper. "Why am I not even part of it?" She sighed, like I was asking about something tedious, like chores she didn't want to explain. "You chose your path, Marlene. You left. You chased your life. Kenny stayed. He deserves it." Simple, cold, final. No apology, no regret, just erasure. I didn't argue. What was left to say when the verdict had already been delivered? I stepped outside without another word, the heavy air of early spring clinging to my skin. I didn't bother wiping the tears that blurred the cracked pavement in front of me. Let them fall. Let them say what I couldn't. How do you mourn someone who is still alive but already dead to you? By the time I made it home, the light had drained from the sky, leaving the apartment bathed in muted gray. I pulled an old box from the back of my closet. Photos, birthday cards, letters that once meant something. One by one, I fed them to the shredder, listening to the soft, mechanical tearing as the past was chewed into meaningless strips. They signed me away like a broken chair at a garage sale. But they weren't getting my soul, too. The living room smelled like dust and something sour, like anger left out too long. The curtains were half drawn, letting in just enough dying sunlight to cast long, sharp shadows across the worn carpet. I stood just inside the doorway, clutching a folder to my chest like a shield. Kenny lounged on the couch, staring at the muted television, pretending I wasn't there. Rhonda smirked openly from the recliner, her legs draped over the armrest like a queen surveying a peasant. Mom didn't even look up from arranging papers on the coffee table. "I came to talk about the will," I said, my voice steady but low, as if volume alone could make me smaller, less of a threat. Silence stretched between us, thick and oily. "You're always making it about you," Rhonda said suddenly, her voice sugary sweet with just enough acid to burn. "Maybe if you weren't so jealous, you'd understand real family loyalty." I felt the words slide under my skin, cold and sharp. I opened my mouth, then shut it again. Kenny shifted uncomfortably, but never lifted his eyes from the TV. "You think you're owed something?" Rhonda sneered, standing now, coming closer. "You think you're special because you moved away and played pretend at being better than us?" I stayed rooted to the spot, my nails biting into the leather of the folder. "You don't belong here," she hissed, so close now I could smell her cheap perfume, sickly sweet. "Kenny deserves this. You? You're just dead weight." I turned my eyes to my mother, silently begging for something. Denial, defense, anything. She said nothing. Kenny kept staring at the flashing images on the screen, as if he hadn't heard a word. Something inside me snapped, not loudly, not explosively, but with the quiet final click of a lock sliding into place. I breathed in deeply, the air thick and heavy with betrayal. My heart didn't race. It slowed, solidified. "You want me out?" I said, my voice calm, almost kind. "Watch me." I turned on my heel and stepped out into the muggy evening air. The door creaked closed behind me, not a single hand reaching to stop it. Outside, the cicadas screamed into the night. I pulled out my phone with fingers that no longer trembled and dialed the number I never thought I would. The line rang once, twice. "Hello?" the receptionist answered. "My name is Marlene Williams," I said, voice like steel wrapped in velvet. "I need to discuss my legal options." The apartment hummed quietly around me, the refrigerator's low rumble filling the silence I had once feared but now welcomed. My meeting with the lawyer earlier had been swift, clinical, devoid of the emotions that always flooded these walls. For once, someone had spoken to me without pity, without judgment, just facts. And facts, as I was learning, could be freeing. The screen of my phone lit up on the kitchen counter. Kenny. Against my better judgment, I opened the message. "After everything Mom did for you," it read, "this is how you repay her? Abandoning family like a coward? You're selfish, always have been." I swallowed hard, feeling the familiar burn of shame rise, but it didn't stick the way it used to. It slid off the armor I had spent the last few months forging. Another message buzzed in before I could set the phone down. You owe us, Marlene. You'd be nothing without everything Mom sacrificed. You think you can just walk away? Pay your dues?" There it was, laid bare, the ugly, rotting truth. It had never been love. It had been a transaction. A debt ledger written in invisible ink, pulled out and weaponized when the emotional manipulation no longer worked. I set the phone down with deliberate calm and moved to the closet. The overnight bag I kept tucked away under old sweaters was out within minutes. I packed only what mattered: clean clothes, a journal, Dennis's old lighter. The air outside was thick, New Orleans clinging to the last breath of night. I stood on the porch a moment, letting the coolness settle into my skin, grounding me. Then, without ceremony, I opened my banking app and canceled the transfer that had chained me to a past that never wanted me. I blocked Kenny's number. I typed out a single text to my mother, staring at the blinking cursor longer than necessary before hitting send. "I'm done trying. No drama, no goodbye." I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat as I slid into the car. The engine purred to life, a sound that felt more alive than anything I had heard in that house for years. The city lights blurred and shrank behind me as I drove, the road opening wide and unknown ahead. Not all journeys need an audience. Some are just meant to be survived. The rain fell in soft sheets against the windows of my little cottage, a gentle drumming that felt almost like a heartbeat. I moved slowly through the space, breathing in the quiet, adjusting to the strange emptiness that didn't feel like loss, but something more tender: recovery. The rooms were sparse but warm, filled with nothing but the essentials and the promise of something new. No piles of guilt stacked in corners. No thick air buzzing with expectation. Just light and the faint smell of rain-soaked earth. The silence settled over me like a second skin. At first it was uncomfortable, too big, too raw. But slowly it started to stitch itself into something almost beautiful, like the edges of a scar you learn to trace with your fingers, not out of pain, but out of remembrance. In the kitchen, a handful of postcards decorated the fridge, pinned in uneven lines. Italy, Montana, a dusty bookstore in Oregon, places I hadn't been, places I still might go. Next to them, sleeping soundly in a battered dog bed, was Gus, a senior Labrador with graying fur and tired eyes, who looked at me once at the shelter and somehow understood everything without needing to ask. We were a quiet little team, Gus and me. No demands, no debts, just breath and space and the occasional wag of a tail when the day called for it. Some days memories would slip in uninvited, a laugh that wasn't for me, a birthday candle I never blew out, the sound of a door closing softly against a shouted goodbye. They didn't drown me anymore. They floated past, like driftwood too small to sink me. Jake called once, his voice low and awkward. Kenny had lost the house. Mom's health was failing. Things were falling apart faster than anyone could patch them. I didn't gloat, I didn't smile. Some losses just hurt in quieter ways. That night I sat at the tiny kitchen table, the postcard light glinting off the window pane, and wrote a letter I would never send. "I forgive you," I wrote, the words shaky but real. Not because you asked for it, not because you deserve it, but because I do. I folded it carefully, tucking it under a magnet shaped like a compass, a reminder that I could choose my own direction now. As the rain slowed to a drizzle, a small shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering gold across the floor. I stepped outside into the damp earth of my backyard, a little patch of land that was stubborn and messy and mine. With Gus watching lazily from the doorway, I knelt in the soft mud and planted a single rose bush, thorns and all. Maybe love wasn't owed. Maybe it was found, built, protected, and sometimes simply walked away from. Sometimes walking away isn't giving up. It's finally choosing yourself. I spent too long chasing approval that was never mine to earn, anchoring myself to people who saw love as a transaction rather than a connection. In the end, I realized that true family isn't about shared blood. It's about shared respect, trust, and care. If you're struggling right now, feeling unseen, unheard, unloved, please know this. Your worth is not measured by how much pain you can endure for someone else. It's okay to build your own home, plant your own garden, Write your own story? You deserve a life that nurtures you, not one that drains you. What about you? Have you ever had to make the painful choice to walk away from something you once called home? I'd love to hear your story. Share it in the comments below. Even a single word can make someone else feel less alone. If this video touched your heart, please leave a comment with the number 1 or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't connect with this story, I still want to hear your thoughts. What would you have done differently? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss more stories that heal, inspire, and remind us all that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is choose ourselves. End of fan QOI.